Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Along with Jim Geraghty of National Review, I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today. All of it brought to you by ExpressVPN. Protect your online activity today and find out how you can get 3 months of that protection free at expressvpn.com/martini. Much more on that a little bit later in the podcast. Jim joins us by phone today. Jim, let's start with our good martini, and it kind of is a jump off of yesterday's bad martini. We were not very happy to see President Trump in his joint press conference with Vladimir Putin basically declare a moral equivalence as to why American and Russian relations have not been all that great recently. Trump made a point of saying that both sides are to blame, and he's hoping that yesterday's summit is the start of reversing that. But as several different Republican lawmakers and others said yesterday, for the American president to be establishing a moral equivalence between us and Moscow is deplorable. In fact, this is exactly what the liberals were doing back during the Reagan years when he was trying to, win the Cold War. They talked about how he was destabilizing things. He was going to create a nuclear war, and it was upsetting the delicate balance of détente and all sorts of nonsense like that. So to explain this much better than I can, we bring in the august founder of National Review, William F. Buckley, the late, great William F. Buckley, who in 1988 hosted a Firing Line episode where he addressed this very issue when, of course, Russia was then still the USSR. Here's what he said.
What evidence have we that the Soviet Union has, in fact, adjourned its intentions to rule the world? We are trapped by the notion that we're both superpowers. Why don't we do this when they do that? But they have been the aggressors. It is written into their charter that they are the aggressors. To say that we in the Soviet Union are to be compared is the equivalent of saying that the man who pushes the old lady into the way of an oncoming bus and the man who pushes the old lady out of the way of an oncoming bus are both people who push old ladies around.
Just miss Bill Buckley so much, and I know you do even more, Jim. But that's the crux of the deal here. Vladimir Putin's a bad guy, even though they're not the USSR anymore. Russia is still a bad actor in a lot of different ways. We're getting even more evidence of that during the 2016 campaign, and that's the type of answer we should have gotten yesterday.
It is. Any day is a good day to play some William F. Buckley. I would note, Greg, if there's a good martini coming out of this mess, it is that yesterday we saw, and continuing into this morning, that there is a line that is too far for President Trump, even in Republican circles, even in folks who have traditionally been some of his biggest supporters. And I think we ought to give credit where it's due. Laura Ingraham, Newt Gingrich, Byron York over at the Washington Examiner, all to varying degrees said anything from this was a mistake to this was appalling, that whatever instincts Trump has on Russia, and it's worth noting that according to White House sources, this was not the plan. The plan was to confront Putin. The plan was to press him on certain issues, and we don't know what happened in that one-on-one session between the two of them. And we might argue it doesn't really, I'm not sure how much it matters, even if he took a tough line with Putin behind closed doors. This was the world stage, this was the world watching, and this was the opportunity. And I keep coming back to the thought that if Trump had picked one area to really press or to rebuke Putin. He doesn't have to, Jeanine Pirro, a traditional Trump defender, was appearing on Fox News, and at one point she said, Greg, well, what do people expect for him, to pull out a gun and shoot him? Now, I don't know about you, Greg, but I didn't know that was on the menu of options. And, that'd be great. Yeah, go for that. Obviously, that would cause its own set of issues, but, Greg, I think we can all agree that would pretty much put the narrative that Trump is a puppet of Putin to bed. I think at that point we thought, okay, yeah, well, he did shoot Putin. You have to give him credit for that part. But more seriously, if he had said, the use of the nerve agent in Salisbury, England is unacceptable, if he had mentioned Crimea, if he had mentioned, the shooting down of the Malaysian Airlines jet, cyber hacking, there's a wide variety of issues where we have major problems with what the Russian government is doing. And he could have addressed any one of them. Had he addressed any one of them, I think there would have been at least an argument, okay, well, at least he did X. But he didn't do any of those, which I think is what has people really bothered, coupled with the Declaration of Moral Equivalence. I mean, when you're asked, do you believe your own intelligence agencies or the denial of the Russian ruler, there is only one right answer for an American president, right? You can't throw your own intelligence agencies, your own law enforcement, no matter what you think of Peter Strzok or Mueller or any of these other stuff going on. You have to say, I trust my people, because they're your people, because you're the American president. If you don't stand up for them, who will? And that's what I think really had people just shocked and appalled and just kind of blown away by this. Even people who are traditionally very much inclined to give the president the benefit of the doubt. So that blew up in his face. He's getting a lot of pushback today, and I hope I don't think there's a extensive way to really walk this back or undo it. Yes, the administration has had some tough policies against Russia, but this is this is an opportunity that is unlikely to come again. And, at some point, will Trump and Putin do another summit? Perhaps. Could he take a tougher line then? Yeah, I guess so. But he's just handed Putin everything he's ever wanted in terms of propaganda value and things like that. So frustrating, but at least there's a little bit of hope that there's a fairly bipartisan consensus that the President of the United States should not be drawing any moral equivalency between the United States and Russia.
Well, Jim, this is the second consecutive day this week we've extolled something from 1988. This was an episode of Firing Line. Yesterday, of course, it was the heroics of Officer John McClane at Nakatomi Plaza. And as we were mentioning before we went on the air, that edition of Firing Line also featured then Congressman/presidential candidate Jack Kemp and UN Ambassador Jeane Kirkpatrick on the right, and Gary Hart and Patsy Schroeder on the left. So it's like Battle of the Network Stars political style back from the 1980s. Good stuff.
I remember the good old days when it was the other side that was always blaming America first, to use Jeane Kirkpatrick's phrase.
Exactly right. Yeah, Jeane would not have been happy yesterday, I can tell you that. All right, let's move on to someone who did confront Vladimir Putin, and unfortunately it's our bad martini, but we'll explain why in a second. Chris Wallace of Fox News, I believe, got the only U.S. outlet interview of Vladimir Putin, and he asked him some very tough questions, as you would expect from Chris Wallace, and he also challenged him on Russian meddling in 2016. So here's the first of two clips.
You have repeatedly said, and you said again today, that this was not the action of the Russian state, that if it was anything, it was patriotic Russian individuals. I have here the indictment that was presented on Friday from the special counsel Robert Mueller that says that 12 members of Russian military intelligence, the GRU, and they talk specifically about units 26-165 and 74-455. They say, you smile, let me finish. They say that these units were specifically involved in hacking into Democratic Party computers, stealing information, and spreading it to the world to try to disrupt the American election. May I give this to you to look at, sir?
And he wouldn't take it. He made Wallace put it on a table. That little laugh from Vladimir Putin is always kind of chilling, but Wallace wasn't done. He had another tough question for him.
Why is it that so many of the people that oppose Vladimir Putin end up dead or close to it?
Well, first of all of us have plenty of political rivals. I'm pretty sure President Trump has plenty of political rivals.
But they don't end up dead.
Not always. Well, haven't presidents been killed in the United States? Have you forgotten about it? Well, has Kennedy been killed in Russia or in the United States?
No, so JFK was killed 55 years ago, Jim, so therefore the pile of bodies of people who opposed Vladimir Putin is just a mere coincidence.
I was going to say, yes, Kennedy was killed by a self-professed communist with a Russian wife who tried to defect to the Soviet Union.
That's right.
The pair on this guy, Greg, sometimes Russians are killed by Russians, sometimes Americans are killed by Russians. You never know how it will work out. So why is this a bad martini? Well, for starters, Chris Wallace is probably going to have his interns taste his food before he eats from here on out.
Right.
And secondly, just the sense of, first of all, it was a really good, tough interview of Vladimir Putin. We didn't get enormously illuminating answers from Putin. I don't think we necessarily expected it. But for the first time in a really long time, Vladimir Putin was subjected to tough questions with specifics, with details, and he had to try to squirm his way out from them by offering utter nonsense of like, well, sometimes all my critics end up dead, but JFK got shot, so sometimes these things happen. Nonsensical excuses like those. By the way, isn't it really great to see a Fox News journalist just hammering Putin with specifics and tough questions. If only somebody like Megyn Kelly could have done that, huh, Greg? So there, look, in the end, I think the other thing which is frustrating about it is we've seen a lot of criticism of Fox News. It's Trump TV, or this is basically America's version of state-run television, blah, blah, blah. And look, look, Fox News contains multitudes, right? You're going to have your Sean Hannity's, your Eric Bolling's, your Laura Ingram's, your folks who are usually really, full-on cheerleaders for Donald Trump, mostly in the opinion section, the primetime hours, Tucker Carlson, folks like that. But then they have the news division, and I think Chris Wallace does a fine job. I think Brett Baer does a fine job. Catherine Herridge, all of the, most of the Fox News division does their job pretty darn well. And I think they try to do it down the middle as they see it. Maybe there's a little more focus on issues that are of interest to conservatives and things like that. But, there's a very big gap between Chris Wallace and Sean Hannity. And I think this is the bad martini, is that this is exactly the sort of journalism, not just, America, I think the world needs, and it's going to largely get overshadowed by all the ongoing controversies and things like that. And so I want to say good job, Chris Wallace. I wish it stood out more in our current news environment, and I don't think it will.
Yes, well done. Exactly. Fox won't get the credit for having Chris Wallace. Chris Wallace won't get much of the credit, and Vladimir Putin will probably skate for giving lousy answers. But again, kudos to Wallace for asking the tough questions when very few others are. Well, if you want to avoid Russian interference into your elections, or if you want to avoid Russian interference in any way, or other hackers, with all the recent news about online security breaches, it's hard not to worry about where your data goes. Making an online purchase or simply accessing your email could put your private information at risk. You're being tracked. You're being tracked online by social media sites, by marketing companies, and by your mobile or internet provider. Not only can they record your browsing history, but they often sell it to other corporations who want to profit from your information. And that's why you can now take back your privacy by using ExpressVPN.
ExpressVPN has easy-to-use apps that run seamlessly in the background of your computer, phone, or tablet. Turning on ExpressVPN protection just takes one click. ExpressVPN secures and anonymizes your internet browsing by encrypting your data and hiding your public IP address. Protecting yourself with ExpressVPN costs less than $7 a month, and it's rated the #1 VPN service by TechRadar and comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you ever use public Wi-Fi and want to keep hackers and spies and Vladimir Putin from seeing your data, ExpressVPN is the solution. And if you don't want to hand over your online history to your internet provider or data resellers, ExpressVPN is the answer for you.
Protect your online activity today and find out how you can get 3 months free. That's right, free. ExpressVPN.com/martini. That's EXPRESSVPN.com/martini for 3 months free when you sign up for a 1-year package. Visit ExpressVPN.com/martini to learn more. So, Jim, as you mentioned with a couple anecdotes there, the reaction to President Trump yesterday has been to the extreme on both sides. You had Jeanine Pirro saying the only thing that Trump critics would have accepted was for Trump to shoot Putin. You've got Congressman Cohen, who last week wanted to give Peter Strzok a Purple Heart, saying that he basically wanted a military coup now because the president was working at the behest of an adversary. You've got all sorts of other people. John Brennan saying this amounted to high crimes and misdemeanors. But for the gold medal today, we're going to MSNBC. Ali Velshi sitting in for Chris Hayes, and one of his guests was Jill Wine-Banks. She was a prosecutor during the Watergate era, and she was making the point that she thinks this is actually a little bit worse than Watergate because this involves a foreign entity rather than Americans trying to do nefarious things against other Americans. And here's the comparison she made.
We were burglarized this time by foreign agents. And it's just as serious to me as the Cuban Missile Crisis in terms of an attack or the 9/11 attack. The president is taking the side of the people who attacked us instead of trying to prevent a future attack. He has done nothing to make sure that the elections 4 months away are going to be safe. And I would say that his performance today will live in infamy as much as the Pearl Harbor attack or Kristallnacht.
Wow. Pearl Harbor, Kristallnacht, Cuban Missile Crisis, and 9/11. Jim, it wasn't a good day for the president. I'll admit that. A lot of bad things that we've talked about here. But the one thing you can always count on is for the left to go completely overboard and diminish the argument that they were hoping to make.
Was she just going through the history books and looking for anything bad, Greg? Ollie, this is as bad as the 100 Years' War. This is the bubonic plague. This is the worst we've seen since the fall of Rome. Okay, slow your roll, cowboy. Look, is this bad? Yeah, I do think some historical perspective is in order. Not all bad things are equivalent. I do kind of feel like, in fact, some of those comparisons feel pretty borderline offensive. Some would say jumping right over that border. I mean, in the end, Trump going up there and kind of echoing what Putin wants to hear and basically communicating that he believes Putin over his own intelligence agencies, yeah, it's disgraceful. It's embarrassing. It makes your blood boil. But at least as far as we know so far, Greg, nobody's died. Okay? I mean, as we mentioned earlier in the podcast, Chris Wallace has to watch his back for the next couple of weeks. But, nobody's died out of yesterday's press conference yesterday. So it doesn't compare to 9/11. It doesn't compare to Pearl Harbor and things like that. This is almost exactly the best case scenario that Trump could hope for, which is that if the accusations and the reaction to it gets furious enough, people will tune it out of, okay, here comes the same old hysterics, et cetera, et cetera. And, this constant turned up to 11 overreaction, I think makes people tune it out. And it delegitimizes the serious arguments against this. Now, again, this is not a terribly well-known figure and all kind of stuff. But, I guess it's just an indicator of just how much people feel like they have to say something even more provocative, even more outrageous in order to stand out. And by doing so, they kind of self-isolate themselves or they self-marginalize themselves by making comparisons that are really kind of ridiculous and that have poor taste, that do more to obscure the problem than to illuminate it.
Yeah, for most of the day yesterday, and this was over at CNN, the banner at the bottom of the screen said something to the effect of Trump stuns world, sides with Putin against U.S. intel community or something like that. And then as Jake Tapper was going to break, I tweeted out a picture of this. It just said, coming up, outrage. And that's just kind of the way that most mainstream media works nowadays. Yesterday, it was far more warranted than some other days. But, yeah, it's dialed up to 11 pretty much every day, no matter what. And it dilutes the impact of days when it probably ought to be dialed up pretty high.
Greg, I just want to point out, give Jake Tapper and CNN a little bit of credit. That is truth in advertising.
That's true.
Coming up next, outrage.
That's right. All day long. Jim, have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. And be sure to visit our friends over at ExpressVPN. Protect your online activity. Stop people from tracking your moves online and selling it to a bunch of people. ExpressVPN.com/martini. And tune in again Wednesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.